I found the note on my pillow at 6:12 in the morning. I remember that because the alarm clock was still glowing beside my bed, and I hadn't put my glasses on yet. It was folded in half. One sheet of printer paper. My son's handwriting. I opened it. "Don't build your future around me or my house." That's all it said. I read it twice. Then I sat there. The heat came on with that old clicking sound it made every morning, and somewhere down the hall I could hear the refrigerator running. I should have been angry. I wasn't. Mostly I was confused. The words weren't even what bothered me most. It was my house. My house. The house my wife and I bought 31 years ago. The house we'd spent years paying for. The house where my son had learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway, where he'd broken a window playing baseball, where my wife had measured his height against the kitchen door frame. My house. I folded the note back up. I didn't wake my son. He was staying in the guest room. He'd been there 8 months by then. He told me it was temporary. I believed him. That's the part I've had to admit to myself. I believed him because he was my son. He'd lost his job. His marriage had fallen apart. His business hadn't worked out. At least that's what he'd told me. So I said, "Come home for a while." I never put a time limit on it. Maybe I should have. I got dressed and went downstairs. My son's work boots were beside the back door. His coffee mug was in the sink. His truck was in my driveway. Everything looked normal. Except it wasn't. I'd started noticing little things. Mail with his name on it was coming to my address. There were packages in the garage I'd never ordered. He had started answering questions about the house as if he were the person responsible for it. A few weeks earlier, he'd even said, "We should probably replace those gutters before winter." I said, "We?" He laughed. "You know what I mean." At the time, I let it go. That morning, I didn't. I made coffee. I put the note beside my cup. I didn't drink the coffee. At 7 o'clock, I called my attorney. I hadn't called him in almost 2 years. When he answered, I said, "I need to see you this morning." He asked if everything was all right. I said, "I don't know yet." He told me to come at 8:30. I took the note with me. I didn't tell my son where I was going. When I came home around noon, he was sitting in the guest room with the door open. He looked at the envelope in my hand. Then he looked at me. "You went to see your lawyer." It wasn't a question. I set my keys on the counter. "How'd you know?" He shrugged. "You've been acting strange." I almost smiled. "You left a note on my pillow." "I know." "So?" "I was trying to tell you something. You could have talked to me." "I didn't think you'd listen." That bothered me. Because maybe he was right said. Maybe I'd gotten so used to making things easy for him that I had stopped asking questions. I said, "What did you mean by my house?" He looked away. "I just meant the house." "No, you wrote my house." He rubbed his jaw. "I didn't mean it like that." I didn't argue. Instead, I asked, "Why don't you tell me what you did mean?" He stood there for a few seconds. Then he said, "You need to start planning for yourself." "I am." "No, Dad. You keep acting like I'm going to be here forever." I said, "You're the one living here." "Exactly." Then he walked away. That was the first time I realized the note wasn't really about my future. It was about his. I went back to my attorney's office the next day. He had already pulled my old estate documents. I told him everything. He listened. Then he asked me one question. "Has your son ever had access to your financial paperwork?" I said yes. After my wife died, my son helped me sort through tax papers and insurance documents. He'd been in my office plenty of times. My attorney nodded. Then he said something that made me uncomfortable. "Then don't confront him yet." I asked why. "Because right now you have suspicion. You need facts." So I went home and started looking. Not like some detective. I just went through my own files. Old tax returns, mortgage statements, insurance paperwork, receipts, things I'd shoved into drawers because I thought I'd deal with them later. That's when I found the first strange document. It was a bank statement with my son's name on it. His business account. My home address was listed as his residential address. That wasn't necessarily wrong. He lived there, but attached to the statement was a copy of a loan application. I looked at the page, then I saw my name. There was a signature beside it. It looked like mine, but I hadn't signed it. I knew that much. I took the document to my attorney. He didn't say much. He just stared at it. Then he asked, "Did you authorize him to use your name as a guarantor?" "No," he looked at me. "Are you certain?" "Yes." That was when the whole thing became different. Until then, I'd been wondering whether my son was becoming entitled. Now I was wondering whether he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. My attorney told me not to accuse him. He made copies. He told me to leave the original where it was, so I did. For the next week, I acted like I hadn't found anything. I made breakfast, I asked about work, I complained about the weather. My son seemed relieved. One morning, he came into the kitchen carrying a folder. He put it beside my coffee. "What's that?" "Something we should take care of." I opened it. It was paperwork related to the house. He had already filled in most of it. I looked at him. "What is this?" "It's just a transfer." "A transfer of what?" "The house." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. I couldn't think of anything else to do. He didn't laugh. He said, "Dad, listen." I closed the folder. "No." His face tightened. "You haven't even heard me. I don't need to. You're getting older. There are certain sentences you remember. That was one." I looked at him. He realized he'd said it wrong. He tried to correct himself. "I mean, you're not getting any younger," I said. "That's better?" He sighed. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" "From people taking advantage of you." I looked at the papers, then back at him. "By putting my house in your name?" He didn't answer. That was the answer. He picked up the folder. "You don't trust me. I trust you to be my son." He stared at me. "I don't know what that means." "It means you're my son. It doesn't mean you're the owner of my house." He left the kitchen. I heard his bedroom door close. That afternoon, I called my attorney. He told me to come in. When I arrived, he had another document waiting for me. A title company had contacted his office. Someone had made an inquiry about my property. Nobody had filed a transfer. Nobody had sold anything. But someone had been asking questions. My attorney wouldn't tell me who. He didn't have to. I already knew. "Still," he said, "we need one more thing." "What?" "Proof that you never authorized any transfer." I said, "How do we get that?" He smiled a little. "We wait." I didn't understand then. I did a few days later. My son came home angry. He walked straight into the kitchen. "Dad, did you call the bank?" I said, "Which bank?" He stopped, just for a second. Then he said, "Never mind." I knew then. He knew I had found something. He walked back toward the hallway. I said, "You should sit down." He turned around. "No, you need to hear me. I've heard enough." Then he said something I hadn't expected. "You don't understand what I'm trying to do," I said. "Then explain it." He stood there. His shoulders dropped. And for the first time, he didn't look like a man trying to take something from me. He looked scared. He said, "I owe people money." I didn't say anything. He continued, "My business went bad. Worse than I told you." "How bad?" He looked at the floor. "Bad." That wasn't enough, so I waited. Finally he said, "If I don't fix it, they can come after everything I have." I said, "And you don't have anything." He looked at me. "I have this house." There it was. Not my house. Not our house. This house? He meant mine, but in his mind, he'd already included it in the list of things he could use to save himself. I asked, "Were you planning to sell it?" "No." The answer came too quickly. I waited. He rubbed his face. "Not exactly," I said. "What does that mean?" He sat down. "I thought I could borrow against it." "You don't own it." "I know." "Then why were you acting like you did?" He didn't answer, and that silence told me more than anything else. My attorney had been right. The problem wasn't simply inheritance. My son wasn't waiting for me to die. He was trying to solve his life with something that wasn't his. I went back to my attorney the following morning. We changed my will. We updated the trust. We removed my son from the financial accounts where I'd previously given him access. And we made one very important change. The house would not pass directly to him. But I didn't disinherit him completely. I left him something else. A small amount of money, protected from his creditors, with conditions attached. He could use it to start over. He couldn't use my home as collateral. He couldn't sell it. He couldn't borrow against it. He couldn't control it. I didn't tell him. I went home and waited. 3 days later, he came through my front door without knocking. He was furious. I had never seen him that angry. He held a letter in his hand. "You changed everything," I said. "I changed my paperwork." "You cut me out." "No, you did. I protected what belongs to me." He slammed the letter onto the kitchen table. "You're my father." "I know. You're supposed to help me." "I did." "You don't understand." "No," I said. "I understand now." He looked at me. I could see the fight leaving him. He sat down. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "What am I supposed to do?" That was the first honest question he'd asked me in months. I told him that my attorney had arranged the money, the conditions, the apartment he could afford, the fact that he could rebuild without touching my house well. He listened. Then he asked, "Why would you still help me?" I said, "Because you're my son." He looked down. "And after everything?" I said, "Helping you doesn't mean handing you my life." He didn't answer. He stayed at the table for a long time. Eventually he said, "I'm sorry." I believed him. Not because the word fixed anything, it didn't, but because he wasn't asking me for the house anymore. He was asking me if there was still a way back. I told him there was. It took time. There were months when we barely spoke. Then there were phone calls, short ones at first, then longer. He got another job. He moved into a small apartment. His business was gone. So was the house he had imagined using to save it. But the house was still standing. My house. The same driveway, the same kitchen. My wife's chair still beside the window. I still have that note. It's in the back of my desk. Sometimes I take it out. Not because I'm angry. I keep it because I don't ever want to forget how easily love can make you ignore something that's right in front of you. My son thought he needed my house to fix his life. What he really needed was to learn that being my son didn't mean owning what I had built. And I needed to learn something too. I could love him without surrendering everything. We're better now. Not like before. Maybe that's okay. Last Thanksgiving, he came over and helped me put the old decorations out. He found the ladder in the garage. He looked at me and said, "You still keep all this junk?" I said, "Your mother bought half of it." He smiled. "I know." And for a few minutes, it felt normal. Just my son standing in my garage complaining about my junk. I didn't think about the note. I didn't think about the paperwork. I didn't think about the house. I just watched him carry the boxes inside. And when he left that evening, he didn't ask what would happen to the house when I was gone. He just said, "I'll see you Sunday." That's enough for me. The note is still folded in the back of my desk. The house is still in my name. And my son's finally stopped looking at my front door like it was the entrance to his future.